Who was the first god to fall? Was it Zeus, the king, left to crumble, forgotten by the very world he once ruled? Or Hades, still trapped below, waiting for prayers that never came? Or Medusa, whose name lived on, but whose truth was buried beneath fear and myth? One by one, they faded. A man dies when his name is forgotten. The gods were no different. And today, their final moments will be remembered. But we begin with the most heartbreaking fall of all. And no, it's not Zeus. The fall of Olympus, it didn't start with fire. It began with forgetting. No enemies stormed Olympus. No gods were slain in battle. The sky didn't split. The earth didn't shake. The gods weren't killed. They were ignored. And for immortals born from the leaf, that's all it took. The temples emptied first. Not suddenly, just slowly. Fewer torches. Fewer voices. The prayers softened until they stopped altogether. The festivals lost their color. The sacrifices turned to stories. People still spoke their names, but only in books. Only in myths. And that's when it began. Aphrodite felt desire turn into currency. Ares watched humans build machines that killed without bloodlust, without honor. Apollo's oracles sat silent while satellites predicted the future better than any god ever could. Demeter's harvests were replaced by artificial growth. Dionysus faded not from disuse, but from replacement. His chaos was now chemical, synthetic, sold by the bottle. The world moved forward. The gods stood still. Olympus itself began to crack. The thrones grew cold. The golden halls rusted under clouds no one looked up to anymore. The sacred fires, once eternal, burned lower with each unanswered prayer. Then they went out. No one noticed. Inside, the gods argued. Some said mortals betrayed them. Others said the world changed too fast. Some blamed Zeus for letting his power rot from within. But there was no one left to hear the blame. No mortals. No followers. Just gods talking to gods in a world that had already moved on. The wind still touched Olympus, but it didn't carry voices. Only dust. And then the worst part came. Not collapse, but stillness. The kind where nothing breaks because nothing's left to hold together. No goodbye. No destruction. Just absence. The great hall stands now like a ruin that never fell. No war. No blood. No smoke. Just silence where gods once ruled. This was the fall of Olympus. Not with fire, but with forgetting. Hades, the underworld's lonely king. Most people think Hades was never defeated, that he stayed strong while the other gods disappeared. But that's not the full truth. Hades didn't fall in battle. He didn't fade with time. He was left behind, and that might be worse than death. While his brothers ruled the skies and the sea, Hades took the underworld. He didn't complain. He didn't fight for a different role. He simply walked beneath the earth, placed a crown on his head, and took his throne in the land of the dead. For centuries, he ruled the shadows. Souls came every day. Priests gave offerings. His name was whispered with fear. Hades was never loved, but he was remembered. And that was enough. But slowly, the world above began to change. People stopped believing. They buried their dead without coins for the ferrymen. They stopped lighting fires in his name. They stopped fearing the underworld. They stopped fearing him. The river Styx, which once carried thousands of souls each day, grew quiet, then still. The dead stopped arriving. The gates to the underworld stopped opening. The throne room turned cold. His kingdom, once full of voices, became a tomb of silence. Hades did not rage. He did not leave. He stayed, because that was his job, to watch the underworld. Even if there was nothing left to watch, his three-headed dog, Cerberus, no longer growled. With no souls to guard, the beast simply curled up at his feet and slept. The halls of the dead, once echoing with footsteps and cries, now stood empty. The torches burned out one by one, and no one came to light them again. Persephone, the one person who brought warmth to his cold world, had long since stopped returning. Her visits were tied to seasons, but even seasons move on. Her name faded into the story, and her story into myth. Hades stopped waiting for her. It hurt too much to hope. He remembered everything. He remembered being feared. He remembered ruling. He remembered when his name had meaning. Now he was a ghost in his own kingdom. Not dead, not alive, just there. But he didn't disappear. That was the cruel part. He remained, alone, forever. A god with no worship. A ruler with no people. A voice with no one left to hear it. Time passed, but nothing changed. No new souls. No prayers. No light. Just the sound of his own thoughts in a place where no one else existed. Hades, the god of the dead, was now surrounded by something even worse than death. Emptiness. He couldn't stop remembering what he used to be. He was powerful, feared, respected. Now he sat on a stone throne, holding on to memories that no longer mattered. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want worship. He just wanted not to be alone. But that's what happens to gods when they're forgotten. They don't explode. They don't scream. They stay, waiting, hoping, fading. Hades didn't fall. He endured. And that might be the saddest end of all. Because he wasn't destroyed by war, or time, or even man. He was destroyed by silence. Medusa, the truth buried beneath the myth. A man dies when his name is forgotten. But Medusa's name never faded. Her curse was worse. She was remembered, but never understood. She was not born a monster. She did not choose to be feared. Medusa was a mortal girl, a priestess in the temple of Athena, and she gave her life to the gods. She asked for nothing, only to serve, to pray, to remain untouched by the world. But the gods don't protect those who worship them. Not always. Not when it's inconvenient. Poseidon saw her. That was all it took. The god of the sea stormed into the temple and took what he wanted, not in the shadows, but in Athena's sacred space. And when it was over, it wasn't Poseidon who was punished. Athena turned on Medusa. She did not offer mercy. She offered transformation. Hair became snakes. Beauty became terror. Eyes turned deadly. A body turned to stone on the inside before it ever did to anyone else. Exiled, cursed, alone, Medusa fled to the edges of the world. She made no threats. She declared no war. She hid, deep in a ruined temple where no man would find her. Unless they were looking for glory. That's when the stories began. Not of what was done to her, but of what she became. A monster, a beast, a challenge. Men crossed oceans not to speak to her, not to ask her story, but to kill her. She never left her home. They came to her, sword drawn. And when they turned to stone, the world blamed her, not the ones who came to take her life, but the one who dared to protect it. The gods stayed silent. The same ones who cursed her, who armed her hunters, watched from above as hero after hero turned her pain into legend. Not a single one saw her. None of them asked if she wanted to be saved. And then came Perseus. He was given the gifts of Olympus, a shield that showed reflections, a blade sharp enough to cut fate, a winged horse born from the blood of Medusa's future. He didn't come with questions. He came with orders. And when he reached her temple, he didn't face her. He crept behind her, watching her through the shield, never daring to meet her eyes. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't attacking. She was sleeping. He raised his sword, and with one strike ended the only thing she had left, herself. But her death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her worst chapter. Her head was lifted as a weapon, hung from shields, used in war. People shouted her name in fear, carved her face into stone, wore her image like armor, all while forgetting the girl beneath the myth. They didn't bury Medusa. They displayed her, and the stories that followed were never about the temple, or Poseidon, or Athena. They were about the monster, the killer, the cursed woman who turned men to stone. Not once did anyone say, "She asked for none of this. She didn't fade like the others." She was remembered, but her memory was stolen. Her truth was rewritten. Her pain became someone else's power. And that may be the cruelest fate of all, not to be destroyed, but to live forever in the wrong story. Zeus, the king's broken throne Zeus, thought he was untouchable. He was the king of gods, the ruler of the sky, the one who made mountains tremble with a single word. For thousands of years he sat on his golden throne, while mortals built temples in his honor and whispered his name in prayer. He had defeated his own father, Cronus. He had survived the Titanomachi. He had divided the world between his brothers and claimed the sky as his domain. He was the most powerful being in existence, and he knew it. But Zeus had forgotten something important. He had forgotten that he was not the first king, and he would not be the last. The prophecy returns long ago, when Zeus was still young and hungry for power. He had heard a prophecy. The same prophecy that had driven his father Cronus to madness. The same prophecy that had made Cronus devour his own children. The oracle had spoken clearly. The king of gods will be overthrown by his own son, just as he overthrew his father. Zeus had laughed at the prophecy. He had been careful. He had swallowed Medusa, the goddess of wisdom, when she was pregnant with Athena. He had avoided the mothers of his children when the prophecies grew too specific. He had killed heroes before they could grow too powerful. He had done everything right. But prophecies have a way of coming true, even when you think you've escaped them, especially when you think you've escaped them. The son who waited. His name was never spoken in the halls of Olympus. The other gods didn't know he existed. Even Zeus had forgotten about him. But he was there, waiting, growing, learning. He was born from one of Zeus's many affairs with mortal women. But this child was different. This child carried something in his blood that the others didn't. Something that made him more than mortal. Something that made him dangerous. The child grew up in the shadows of the world, raised by mortals who didn't know what they were protecting. He learned to fight. He learned to hunt. He learned to hate. And most importantly, he learned to wait. While Zeus sat on his throne, playing with mortals and ignoring the world around him, his son was preparing. He was gathering strength. He was gathering followers. He was gathering weapons that could kill gods. The axe of Kronos. There are weapons in this world that can kill immortals. Most people don't know about them. Most gods try to forget they exist. But they're there, hidden, waiting, passed down through generations of those who remember the old ways. The axe had a name once. The mortals called it the Kronos blade. It was forged in the fires of Tartarus, cooled in the blood of Titans, and sharpened on the bones of the first gods. It was the weapon that Zeus's grandfather had used to kill his own father. It was the weapon that had started the cycle of sons killing fathers. And now it was in the hands of Zeus's forgotten son. The young man had searched for it for years. He had followed whispers and rumors. He had killed monsters and gods alike to find it. He had paid prices that would have driven other men mad. But he had found it. And when he wrapped his fingers around the handle, he felt the weight of destiny in his hands. The gathering storm. Zeus felt it coming, not all at once, but slowly, like a storm building on the horizon. The prayers were already fading. The temples were already emptying. The other gods were already disappearing. But there was something else, something darker, something that made the sky itself tremble. He tried to see into the future, but the visions were clouded. He tried to speak to the oracles, but they gave him riddles instead of answers. He tried to command the fates, but they only smiled and said, "What will be, will be." For the first time in centuries, Zeus felt afraid, not of mortals, not of other gods, but of something he couldn't name, something that was coming for him. The sun rises when the young man finally climbed the steps to Olympus. Zeus was waiting for him. The king of gods sat on his throne, dressed in his finest robes, holding his lightning bolt like a scepter. He looked exactly like what he was, a king about to be dethroned. "I know who you are," Zeus said. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. "I know why you're here." The young man didn't answer. He just walked forward, the axe heavy in his hands. He had his father's eyes. He had his father's jaw. He had his father's power, but he had something else. Something Zeus had lost long ago. He had purpose. The final battle they fought like gods. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the earth. The very air burned with power. Zeus threw everything he had at his son. Every trick he had learned. Every spell he had mastered. Every weapon he had forged. But it wasn't enough. The young man was faster, stronger, hungrier. He had spent his whole life preparing for this moment. Zeus had spent his whole life getting soft. The battle raged across Olympus. Pillars cracked. Walls crumbled. The golden throne itself split in half. And through it all, the young man pressed forward, step by step, strike by strike, until Zeus was backed against the edge of his own domain. "You don't understand," Zeus gasped. "If you kill me, you'll become just like me. The cycle will continue. Your son will come for you, just like you came for me." The young man raised the axe. "Then I'll be ready for him." The swing that ended everything, the axe, came down in a perfect arc. Not wild, not angry, just inevitable, like the sun setting, like the tide turning, like fate itself. Zeus's head fell from his shoulders and rolled across the marble floor. The king of gods was dead. The throne was empty. The sky was silent. And somewhere in the distance, a new god was born. The new king. The young man picked up his father's crown and placed it on his own head. It was heavy, heavier than he had expected, but it fit. It fit perfectly. He sat on the broken throne and looked out over the world below. The mortals were still there, still praying, still worshiping, but they were praying to him now. The new king, the new god, the new ruler of the sky. And in the back of his mind, he heard the prophecy again. The same prophecy that had driven his grandfather mad. The same prophecy that had killed his father. The king of gods will be overthrown by his own son, just as he overthrew his father. The new king smiled. He was young. He was strong. He was ready. Let his son come. He would be waiting. The cycle continues. Zeus is dead. His head was cut from his shoulders by an axe forged in hell and wielded by the son he forgot. The king of gods fell not to time, not to forgetting, but to the same fate that had claimed his father and his father's father before him. The throne has a new occupant. The sky has a new ruler. The prophecy has been fulfilled, just as it always is, just as it always will be. And somewhere in the world below, a new son is being born. A new heir is taking his first breath. A new challenger is beginning his journey toward the throne. The cycle continues. It always does. It always will. Because that's what gods do. They rise. They rule. They fall. And they are replaced. Zeus learned this the hard way. With an axe. With blood. With the sound of his own crown hitting the floor. The king is dead. Long live the king. Athena, wisdom's shattered shield. Athena thought she was smarter than everyone else. She was the goddess of wisdom, the patron of heroes, the one who never lost a battle. For thousands of years, she sat in her temple, giving advice to mortals and watching over cities. She was the daughter of Zeus, born from his head fully grown and armored. She was supposed to be different, She was supposed to be better, but wisdom without action is just arrogance. And Athena learned this the hard way, the fatal mistake. It started with a simple challenge. A mortal named Arachne, a weaver from a small village in Lydia, claimed she could weave better than any god. The village laughed. The other gods ignored it, but Athena heard every word. She was proud, too proud. She had spent centuries being called the wisest, the most skilled, the most perfect. She wasn't about to let a mortal girl make her look weak. So she disguised herself as an old woman and visited Arachne's shop. She watched the girl weave, and the truth hit her like a lightning bolt. The mortal was skilled, more skilled than she had expected. Maybe even more skilled than ... No, that was impossible. You're good, Athena said, still in her disguise. But you're not that good. The gods are still better. Arachne looked up from her loom with defiant eyes. Then let one of them prove it. The challenge. Athena dropped her disguise. The air in the room grew thick with divine power. The other mortals in the shop fell to their knees, but Arachne stood her ground. She was afraid. Any mortal would be, but she didn't back down. You want to challenge me? Athena asked. Fine. We'll have a contest, you and me. Winner takes all, but if you lose, you'll wish you had never been born. They set up their looms side by side. The whole village gathered to watch. Word spread to other cities. Other gods came to see the spectacle. It was supposed to be simple. A goddess putting a mortal in her place. A lesson in humility. But as they worked, something went wrong. Arachne's fingers moved like lightning. Her threads shimmered with colors that shouldn't exist. Her tapestry told the story of the gods' greatest failures. Zeus's rapes, Poseidon's cruelty, Hera's jealousy, Apollo's broken promises. And it was beautiful. More beautiful than anything Athena had ever seen. The unthinkable truth, when they finished, the crowd was silent. Both tapestries were perfect. Both told their stories with skill that made the gods themselves weep. But there was a difference. Athena's tapestry showed the gods as they wanted to be seen. Noble, wise, just. Arachne's showed them as they really were. Flawed, cruel, selfish. And Arachne's was better. Not just in technique, not just in beauty, but in truth, in honesty, in the kind of wisdom that comes from seeing the world clearly, not from being told you're wise your whole life. Athena stared at the mortal's work and felt something she had never felt before. Not anger, not pride, but fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing you're not who you thought you were. The rage of the wise Athena destroyed Arachne's tapestry with one stroke. The beautiful threads disintegrated into dust. The perfect colors faded into gray. The honest truths became nothing but memory. You dare mock the gods? Athena screamed. You dare challenge me with lies? But they weren't lies. That was the problem. Every scene in Arachne's tapestry was true. Every cruel act was real. Every broken promise was documented. The mortal girl had simply woven the truth about the gods, and the truth was ugly. Arachne stood in the ruins of her masterpiece, tears streaming down her face. I only showed what was real. Reality is what I say it is, Athena said. With one gesture, she transformed Arachne into a spider. The girl's body twisted and shrank. Her fingers became legs. Her mouth became pincers. She would spend eternity weaving, but her webs would be simple things. Traps for flies, nothing more. The poison of pride Athena thought she had won. She had punished the mortal. She had protected the god's reputation. She had shown the world that wisdom belonged to the gods, not to mortals. But the damage was done. The other gods had seen Arachne's work. They knew the truth. More importantly, they knew that Athena knew the truth, and they knew she was so threatened by it that she had to destroy it. Word spread among the gods. Whispers became rumors. Rumors became gossip. The goddess of wisdom had been outdone by a mortal girl. The one who never lost had lost to a teenager with a loom. And the worst part? She had destroyed the evidence. She had acted not with wisdom, but with rage. Not with justice, but with pride. She had become everything she claimed to despise. The curse of truth. What Athena didn't know was that the truth has a way of spreading, even when you destroy it, even when you think you've buried it. The story of her contest with Arachne spread to every corner of the world, but it changed as it traveled. The details twisted. The facts became fiction. In some versions, Athena was the hero. In others, she was the villain. In most, she was just another cruel god who couldn't handle being challenged. The story became a warning. Don't challenge the gods. But also, don't trust them. They're not as wise as they claim to be. Athena's reputation crumbled. The mortals who had once brought her difficult problems started solving them themselves. The heroes who had once prayed for her guidance began trusting their own instincts. The cities that had worshipped her began to question whether wisdom came from the gods or from experience. The goddess of nothing. The irony was perfect. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, had made the most foolish mistake of all. She had shown the world that she was just as flawed as any mortal, just as proud, just as cruel, just as afraid of being wrong. Her temples emptied, her statues cracked, her sacred owl flew away and never returned. The olive tree she had gifted to Athens withered and died. The city that bore her name removed her statues and renamed itself. Athena sat in her empty temple, surrounded by dust and silence. She had one visitor in those final days, a small spider spinning its web in the corner, the same spider she had created from Arachne's broken body. I was right, Athena said to the spider. My tapestry was better. My technique was perfect. I am the goddess of wisdom. The spider didn't answer. It just kept weaving. Simple, honest webs. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be proclaimed or defended. The kind of wisdom that comes from accepting what you are instead of pretending to be what you're not. The final judgment Athena is still there, in her empty temple, still claiming she was right, still insisting that wisdom belongs to the gods. But wisdom is not about being right. It's about being honest. It's about seeing the world clearly. It's about accepting hard truths. And the hardest truth of all is this: the wisest person in the room is often the one who admits they don't know everything. The strongest person is often the one who can change their mind. The most skilled person is often the one who can lose with grace. Athena could do none of these things. She was the goddess of wisdom, but she was not wise. She was the patron of heroes, but she was not heroic. She was the one who never lost, but she had lost the most important thing of all, the ability to grow. The spider still weaves in the corner of her temple. Simple, honest webs. The kind of truth that survives because it doesn't need to be defended. The kind of wisdom that lasts because it doesn't need to be proclaimed. And in the end, that's all the wisdom the world needs. Not the false wisdom of gods who think they know everything, but the honest wisdom of creatures who know they don't. Apollo. The oracle's broken voice Apollo was the god of prophecy, music, and the sun. He was beautiful, talented, and loved by mortals and gods alike. His temple at Delphi was the most important oracle in the world. Kings and emperors came to him for advice. Heroes sought his guidance. The future itself bowed to his will. But seeing the future and controlling it are two different things. And Apollo learned this with a broken heart. The curse of Cassandra. Her name was Cassandra. She was a priestess of Apollo, the most beautiful woman in Troy. Apollo loved her the moment he saw her. Not the cruel, possessive love of Zeus, but real love. The kind that makes gods act like mortals. He appeared to her in his temple, shining with divine light. I will give you the gift of prophecy, he said. You will see the future as clearly as I do. All I ask is that you love me in return. Cassandra accepted his gift. The visions came instantly. She saw wars and peace, birth and death, triumph and tragedy. The future spread before her like a tapestry, and she could read every thread. But then she saw something else. She saw what Apollo would do to her if she refused him. She saw the other women he had loved and abandoned. She saw the cruelty that lived beneath his golden smile. "I cannot love you," she said. Apollo's face darkened. "You accepted my gift. You must fulfill your part of the bargain. I would rather die than love a monster." The curse of truth. Apollo could not take back the gift he had given. The power of prophecy was not his to withdraw, but he could twist it, make it useless, make it torture. "You will keep your gift," he said, "but no one will believe your prophecies. You will see the future, but you will be powerless to change it. You will watch disaster after disaster unfold, knowing you could have stopped it if anyone had listened." The curse hit Cassandra like a physical blow. She could still see the future, but now she understood the full horror of it. She saw the fall of Troy. She saw her family's death. She saw her own brutal end. And she knew that no matter how many times she warned them, no one would believe her. She spent the rest of her life screaming warnings that no one heeded. She told the Trojans about the wooden horse. She warned them about the Greek attack. She begged them to flee. But they thought she was mad. They ignored her, pitied her, sometimes even imprisoned her. And Apollo watched it all. He watched her suffer. He watched her plead. He watched her break. And he felt nothing but satisfaction. The price of cruelty, what Apollo didn't realize, was that his curse had a cost. Every time Cassandra spoke a prophecy that went unheeded, every time she suffered for telling the truth, the power of prophecy itself grew weaker. The other oracles began to falter. Their visions became cloudy. Their prophecies became vague. The temple at Delphi, once the most important place in the world, became just another shrine. People stopped coming for advice. They stopped trusting the future. They stopped believing in prophecy altogether. After all, if the gods would curse someone for refusing to love them, what else would they do? If they would twist the truth for revenge, how could any prophecy be trusted? Apollo tried to fix it. He tried to make his oracles more powerful, more accurate. But the damage was done. The very concept of prophecy had been poisoned by his petty revenge. The broken god. The worst part was that Apollo himself began to suffer from the curse. He had been able to see the future clearly, but now his visions were tainted with doubt. He saw what might happen, but not what would happen. He saw possibilities instead of certainties. He tried to warn the gods about the coming changes. He tried to tell them that the mortals would stop believing. He tried to show them that their time was ending, but they ignored him. They thought he was becoming as mad as Cassandra. The irony was perfect. Apollo, the god of prophecy, was cursed with the same fate as the mortal he had destroyed. He could see the future, but no one would believe him. He could warn them, but they would not listen. The last prophecy, when the final moment came, when the last temple burned and the last prayer was spoken, Apollo made one final prophecy. Not to the gods, who had already stopped listening. Not to the mortals, who had already stopped believing. But to himself. "I will be remembered," he said. "Not as a god, but as a story. Not as a prophet, but as a lesson. The lesson that power without wisdom is meaningless. That revenge without justice is poison. That love without respect is not love at all." He was right. We still remember Apollo, but we remember him as a cautionary tale. A beautiful, talented god who destroyed himself with his own cruelty. A prophet who lost his power the moment he chose vengeance over truth. The silence of the oracle. The temple at Delphi still stands, but the oracle is silent. No prophecies echo from its walls. No visions dance in its sacred smoke. The most important oracle in the world became a tourist attraction, a reminder of what once was. Apollo sits in his empty temple, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. He can still see the future, but it's a future without him. A world that has moved on. A world that no longer needs prophets, because it has learned to make its own choices. The god who once held the future in his hands is now just another ghost from the past. The one who could see all possibilities has become irrelevant. The oracle of the gods has become the silence of the forgotten. And in that silence, perhaps, is the most honest prophecy of all. The future belongs to those who make it, not to those who predict it. The truth belongs to those who live it, not to those who see it from afar. Apollo learned this too late. The god of prophecy became the prophet of nothing. The one who could see the future became the one who had no future at all. Artemis, the huntress-caged Artemis, was the goddess of the hunt, the moon, and wild things. She was fierce, free, and untouchable. She ran with wolves and danced with deer. She lived in the forest where no man dared follow. She was the eternal virgin, the one who belonged to no one but herself. But even wild things can be caged. And Artemis learned this when she tried to protect what she loved most. The sacred grove. Deep in the forest of Arcadia, there stood a grove of trees unlike any other. These trees were ancient, planted by the first gods, watered by the tears of nymphs, and blessed by the light of the moon. They were sacred to Artemis, and she protected them with her life. The grove was home to her sacred deer, white as snow and gentle as whispers. It was where she went to think, to dream, to simply be. It was the one place in the world where she could be completely free. But the world was changing. Men were building cities, cutting down forests, turning wild places into farmland. And they were getting closer to her sacred grove. At first, Artemis thought she could stop them. She was a goddess. She was immortal. She was powerful. What could mortals do against her? She was about to find out. The king's ambition. King Aeneas of Calydon was not like other kings. He was ambitious, ruthless, and completely without fear. He had built his kingdom by destroying forests, draining swamps, and turning wild places into profitable land. And he had his eyes on Artemis's grove. The trees are valuable, he told his advisors. The land is perfect for farming. We could build a new city there, make it the center of our kingdom. But it's sacred to Artemis, one of his advisors said. She'll kill anyone who touches it. Aeneas laughed. Gods are just stories, superstitions. I've never seen one, and I've been cutting down sacred groves for 20 years. He was wrong about one thing. Artemis was real, but he was right about something else. He had been destroying sacred places for decades, and no god had stopped him. They were all too busy with their own problems to notice what was happening in the real world. Aeneas was too smart to simply send his men to cut down the trees. He knew that would bring Artemis's wrath down on him. Instead, he laid a trap. He ordered his hunters to kill all the deer in the surrounding forests, not just the common ones, but the sacred ones, the white deer that belonged to Artemis, the gentle creatures that had never harmed anyone. One by one, they fell. Arrows through their hearts, spears through their sides. The forest ran red with their blood, and with each death, Artemis grew more angry, more reckless, more desperate. She began hunting the hunters. She stalked them through the forest, killing them with her silver arrows. She sent wolves to tear them apart. She made their crops fail and their wells run dry. But for every hunter she killed, more appeared. Aeneas had armies of them. And while she was busy with her revenge, he was preparing the real attack. The cage of iron, while Artemis was hunting his men, Aeneas was building something in the heart of the forest. Not a temple, not a city, but a cage. A massive cage made of iron and blessed by priests of a new religion. A cage designed to hold a goddess. The new priests told him the secret. Gods were not all powerful. They were bound by rules. Ancient rules. If you could trap them in the right way, with the right materials, using the right rituals, you could hold them. You could control them. The cage was invisible until it was too late. Artemis ran into the clearing where her sacred grove stood and found herself trapped. The trees were still there, but they were surrounded by iron bars. The deer were still there, but they were already dead, poisoned by the same men who had built the cage. The slow death. Artemis raged against the bars. She tried to break them, to melt them, to wish them away, but the iron was cold and strong. It had been blessed by the new priests and cursed by the old ones. It was designed to hold gods, and it worked. Aeneas came to see her, safely outside the cage. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I thought you'd be taller, more impressive. You're just a woman with a bow." "I am a goddess," Artemis said. "You're a prisoner, my prisoner, and you're going to help me build my kingdom." But Artemis refused to help. She refused to bless his crops or guide his hunters. She refused to do anything but glare at him through the bars. So he left her there, in the cage, with the bodies of her sacred deer, with the corpses of her forest. The withering. Without Artemis's power, the wild places began to die. The forests grew thin. The animals grew sick. The moon itself seemed dimmer. The hunt became nothing but slaughter. The wild became tame. And in her cage, Artemis began to wither. Not from age, but from despair. She was a goddess of wild things, and she was trapped in a box. She was the eternal virgin, and she was owned by a mortal man. She was free, and she was caged. She tried to summon her strength, to break free, to reclaim her power. But the cage was too strong. The iron was too cold. The new religion was too powerful. She was trapped, and she was dying. The price of freedom. Years passed. Aeneas grew old and died. His kingdom fell to his son, who fell to his son. The cage was passed down like an heirloom. A goddess in a box. A symbol of man's triumph over nature. But the new kings were not as smart as Aeneas. They grew lazy. They stopped maintaining the cage. They stopped feeding the goddess. They stopped remembering why she was there. And one day, the cage simply broke. The iron rusted. The blessings faded. The bars crumbled. And Artemis was free. But she was not the same. The years in the cage had changed her. She was no longer wild. She was no longer free. She was broken, empty, a goddess without a purpose. The forests she had protected were gone. The animals she had loved were extinct. The wild places she had ruled were now cities and farms. There was nothing left for her to protect, nothing left for her to hunt, nothing left for her to be. The caged god. Artemis is still free, but she is not wild. She walks through the remaining forests, but she does not run. She watches the few remaining animals, but she does not hunt. She is a goddess of wild things in a world with no wild things left. The cage is gone, but she is still trapped. Not by iron, but by the absence of everything she once was. She is the huntress with nothing to hunt, the protector with nothing to protect, the goddess of the wild in a world that has forgotten what wild means. And that is the cruelest cage of all. Not the one that holds your body, but the one that holds your soul. Not the one made of iron, but the one made of loss. Not the one that keeps you in, but the one that keeps you from being who you were meant to be. Artemis learned that freedom is not just about being able to leave. It's about having somewhere to go. It's about having something to be. It's about having a purpose that makes freedom worth having. Without her wild places, without her sacred animals, without her sacred grove, Artemis is free. But she is also nothing. And maybe that's the worst fate of all. Not to be caged, but to be free in a world that has no place for what you are. Hera, the queen's betrayed heart. Hera was the goddess of marriage, family, and loyalty. She was the queen of the gods, the wife of Zeus, and the protector of all that was sacred between husband and wife. But the cruelest irony of all was that the goddess who protected marriage had the worst marriage of all. And in the end, that's exactly what destroyed her. When Hera first married Zeus, she believed it would be different. She wasn't just any goddess. She was his equal, his queen, his partner in ruling the world. They would build something beautiful together, something eternal, something that would last forever. For a brief moment, it seemed like it would work. They ruled from golden thrones side by side. They made decisions together. They were worshipped together. When mortals prayed for happy marriages, they prayed to both of them. When couples got married, they spoke both their names. Hera thought she had found her purpose. She was the perfect wife, the perfect queen, the perfect goddess. And she would use her power to help other wives and mothers do the same. She was wrong. It started with a nymph, a beautiful, innocent nymph who caught Zeus's eye. Hera found them together in a hidden grove, and her world shattered. This was not just any betrayal. This was the king of the gods, her husband, her partner, destroying everything they had built together. "It doesn't mean anything," Zeus said when she confronted him. "You're my wife, my queen. She's just a distraction." But it did mean something. It meant that their marriage was a lie. It meant that she was not enough. It meant that all her power, all her beauty, all her love was not enough to keep her husband faithful. And it would not be the last time. The women came one after another. Mortal women, goddesses, nymphs, even animals transformed by Zeus's power. Each one was a new knife in Hera's heart. Each one was proof that she was not enough. But the worst part was not the betrayals. It was what happened after. Zeus would make excuses. He would promise to change. He would swear it would never happen again. And then he would do it again, and again, and again. Hera tried everything. She tried forgiving him. She tried ignoring it. She tried making herself more beautiful, more powerful, more perfect. But nothing worked. Zeus was the king of the gods, and he could have anything he wanted. And what he wanted was never just her. So she turned her anger on the women. She couldn't punish Zeus. He was too powerful. But she could punish them. She could make them pay for destroying her marriage. Hera became famous for her jealousy. She cursed Zeus's lovers. She turned them into animals. She made their lives miserable. She destroyed their families. She made them suffer for the crime of being desired by her husband. But with each act of revenge, she became less like the goddess she used to be. She was supposed to protect women, not destroy them. She was supposed to protect marriage, not become the worst example of it. She was supposed to be the perfect wife, not the most bitter and angry one. The mortals began to fear her. When they prayed for happy marriages, they stopped saying her name. When they told stories about marriage, they used her as a warning. When they talked about jealous wives, they said, "Don't be like Hera." She had become the opposite of everything she was supposed to be. As the years passed, Hera grew more and more isolated. She sat on her throne, beautiful and powerful and completely alone. Zeus still came to her, but only out of duty. He still called her his queen, but only in public. He still honored her, but only because he had to. She had no real friends. The other gods avoided her because they feared her anger. The mortals feared her because of her jealousy. The women she had cursed were destroyed or dead. She had pushed away everyone who might have cared about her. She was the queen of the gods, but she was also the loneliest person in the world. The final betrayal was not another woman. It was worse. It was the world itself moving on without her. As people stopped believing in the gods, they stopped believing in marriage too. They stopped thinking it was sacred. They stopped thinking it was permanent. They stopped thinking it was worth protecting. The goddess of marriage watched marriage itself die. Couples stopped praying to her. They stopped asking for her blessing. They stopped believing that marriage was anything more than a piece of paper. They stopped believing that love was eternal. And with each broken marriage, with each divorce, with each betrayal, Hera felt herself fading. She was the goddess of something that no longer existed. She was the protector of something that no longer mattered. In the end, Hera did not die from battle or time, or even forgotten worship. She died from the very thing she had tried to protect. She died from the failure of marriage itself. She died from the knowledge that everything she had believed in was a lie. The goddess who had promised to protect marriage had been betrayed by every marriage she had ever known, starting with her own. She sits now on her empty throne, still beautiful, still powerful, still alone, the queen of nothing, the goddess of a broken promise, the protector of something that no longer exists. And maybe that's the cruelest fate of all, not to be forgotten, but to be remembered as the symbol of everything that went wrong, not to fade away, but to remain as a reminder of failure, not to die, but to live forever with the knowledge that everything you stood for was a lie. Hera learned that it's not enough to be worshipped. You have to be worthy of worship. And when your own life is the opposite of what you teach, even the gods can't save you from the truth. Demeter, the mother's eternal grief Demeter, was the goddess of the harvest, of growing things, of the earth's bounty. She made the crops grow. She made the trees bloom. She made the world fertile and rich and green. But most of all, she was a mother. And like all mothers, she would do anything to protect her child. That love would become her greatest weakness, and ultimately, her destruction. Persephone was not just any daughter. She was perfect, beautiful as a spring morning, innocent as new snow, kind as gentle rain. She was everything good about the world made into a person. And she was Demeter's entire world. Where Persephone walked, flowers bloomed. Where she laughed, birds sang. Where she danced, the earth itself seemed to come alive. She was the embodiment of spring, of new life, of hope. And she was the most important thing in Demeter's universe. Demeter had created the world's bounty, but Persephone was her masterpiece, her perfect creation, her reason for existing. And she would do anything to keep her safe. Every mother has fears, but Demeter's fear was different. It was primal. It was absolute. It was the fear of losing the one thing that made her life worth living. She watched over Persephone constantly. She made sure no harm came to her. She created a perfect world for her daughter to live in. A world of eternal spring, of endless flowers, of perfect safety. A world where nothing could hurt her. But you can't protect someone forever. And you can't keep the world from changing. No matter how powerful you are. No matter how much you love them. Demeter was about to learn this the hard way. It happened in a moment. 1 second, Persephone was picking flowers in a meadow. The next, she was gone. Stolen by Hades, the god of the underworld. Taken from the world of light and life to the world of darkness and death. Demeter didn't know what had happened. She only knew that her daughter was gone. Vanished, lost, and she would do anything to find her. She searched everywhere. She looked in every forest, every valley, every mountain. She asked every mortal, every god, every creature. But no one had seen her. No one knew where she had gone. No one could help her. And with each passing day, Demeter's grief grew stronger. And with her grief, the world began to die. Without Persephone, Demeter couldn't find the strength to make things grow. The crops withered. The trees died. The flowers shriveled. The earth became barren and cold and lifeless. But Demeter didn't care. She didn't care about the crops, or the trees, or the flowers. She only cared about her daughter. And if she couldn't have her daughter, then the world could die. The mortals began to starve. They prayed to Demeter, begged her to make the crops grow again. But she didn't listen. She didn't care. They could all starve as long as she was without her daughter. This was not the loving mother goddess they had known. This was something else, something broken, something dangerous. Finally, Zeus intervened. He couldn't let the world die. He couldn't let all the mortals starve. He told Demeter the truth. He told her where Persephone was. He told her what had happened. But he also told her the price of getting her back. Persephone had eaten food in the underworld. She had tasted the pomegranate seeds. And once you eat in the land of the dead, you can never fully return to the land of the living. Persephone would have to spend half the year in the underworld with Hades. Only half the year could she return to her mother. It was the only way, the only compromise. Demeter had a choice. She could accept the bargain and see her daughter for half the year, or she could refuse and lose her forever. She chose to accept, but the choice destroyed her. When Persephone returned, it was not the same. The innocent girl who had been stolen was gone. In her place was a young woman who had seen death, who had ruled the underworld, who had been changed by her experience. She was still beautiful, still kind, still her daughter, but she was no longer perfect. She was no longer innocent. She was no longer the same person Demeter had lost. And every year she would have to leave again. Every year Demeter would have to say goodbye. Every year she would have to lose her daughter all over again. The world reflected her pain. When Persephone was with her, the world bloomed. When Persephone was in the underworld, the world died. Over and over. A cycle of life and death, of hope and despair, of love and loss. But it was not enough. Half a daughter was not enough. Temporary love was not enough. A broken family was not enough. Years passed, decades, centuries. The cycle continued. Persephone would come. Demeter would be happy. Persephone would leave. Demeter would grieve. Over and over. Forever. But the worst part was not the leaving. It was the knowing. Knowing that it would happen again. Knowing that the goodbye was always coming. Knowing that her daughter would never be fully hers again. Demeter became a goddess of grief, of loss, of the pain that never ends. The mortals still prayed to her for their crops, but they also prayed to her for strength in their own losses. They understood her pain. They knew what it was like to lose someone you love. But they also grew tired of her sadness. They wanted a goddess who could give them hope, not just remind them of loss. They wanted someone who could make things better, not someone who was trapped in her own endless grief. As the world changed and people stopped believing in the gods, they also stopped believing in the old ways of grieving. They stopped thinking that loss was permanent. They stopped thinking that sadness was sacred. They stopped thinking that grief was something to be honored. They wanted to move on, to forget, to heal. They didn't want to be reminded of the pain of loss. They didn't want a goddess who showed them what it looked like to never get over losing someone. So they forgot about Demeter. They forgot about her story. They forgot about her pain. They forgot about her love. And for a goddess whose entire existence was built on never forgetting, this was the cruelest fate of all. Demeter still exists, still grieves, still loves her daughter, still watches her leave every year, still feels the same pain she felt the first time she lost her. She is the goddess of a love that never dies, of a grief that never ends, of a mother's heart that never stops breaking. And in a world that has forgotten how to grieve, she is more alone than ever. But she continues, because that's what mothers do. They love even when it hurts. They protect even when they can't. They remember even when everyone else forgets. And maybe that's the most heartbreaking thing of all. Not that she was forgotten, but that she remembers everything. Every moment of joy, every moment of loss, every goodbye, every hello, every time her heart broke, and every time it healed just enough to break again. Demeter is the goddess of eternal love and eternal loss, and maybe those are the same thing. Persephone, Spring's stolen light, Persephone was supposed to be the goddess of spring, of new life, of hope. She was the daughter of the earth itself, blessed with the power to make flowers bloom and trees grow. She was innocent and beautiful and perfect. She was the future of the world. But her story is not one of spring. It is one of being stolen, of being broken, of being forced to become something she never wanted to be. And it is the story of how even the most innocent can be destroyed by the choices of others. Persephone was picking flowers, just picking flowers. She was young, innocent, happy. She was doing what she loved in the world she loved. She was safe. She was protected. She was with her mother. Then the earth opened up. A chariot of black horses burst from the ground. And before she could scream, before she could run, before she could even understand what was happening, she was gone. Stolen by Hades. Taken to the underworld. Forced to become the queen of the dead. She was not asked. She was not consulted. She was not given a choice. She was simply taken, like a flower picked from the ground, like a toy stolen from a child, like a life ripped from its rightful place. And in that moment, the innocent girl who had been Persephone died. Not her body, not her power, but her innocence, her safety, her trust in the world. In the underworld, Hades tried to make her comfortable. He gave her a throne. He gave her power. He gave her a crown. He told her she was queen now, queen of the dead, queen of the darkness, queen of everything she had never wanted to be. But she was not a queen. She was a prisoner in a palace, a prisoner with a crown, a prisoner with power, but still a prisoner. She refused to eat. She refused to speak. She refused to accept her new life. She would not be the queen of the dead. She would not be Hades' wife. She would not be anything except a daughter who wanted to go home. But refusing to accept reality does not change it. And the longer she stayed, the more the underworld changed her. The darkness seeped into her soul. The coldness froze her heart. The silence taught her to be quiet. She was still beautiful, still powerful, still divine. But she was no longer the same person who had been picking flowers in the meadow. The worst part was not being forced to stay. It was being forced to choose. When she finally ate the pomegranate seeds, it was not because she wanted to. It was because she was dying. Because refusing to eat was killing her. Because she had to choose between death and accepting her fate. She chose to live. But in choosing to live, she chose to be trapped. The seeds bound her to the underworld, made her part of it, made it impossible for her to ever truly leave. It was not really a choice. It was a trap, a cruel trick, a way to make her complicit in her own imprisonment, to make her feel guilty for wanting to survive. And for the rest of her existence, she would remember that moment. The moment when she had to choose between death and accepting a life she never wanted. When she had to choose between giving up and giving in. When Zeus finally negotiated her return, it was not freedom. It was a new kind of prison. She could spend half the year with her mother, but she would always have to return to the underworld. Always have to be queen of the dead. Always have to be two different people. In the spring and summer, she was her mother's daughter, the goddess of flowers and growing things, the symbol of life and hope and new beginnings. She tried to be happy. She tried to forget. She tried to be the person she used to be. But in the fall and winter, she was Hades' queen, the ruler of the dead, the symbol of death and ending and darkness. She tried to be strong. She tried to be worthy of the crown. She tried to be the person they needed her to be. But she was never just one person. She was always both. Always divided. Always torn between two worlds, two roles, two selves. And she was never fully herself in either place. Years passed, decades, centuries. The cycle continued. Spring, summer, fall, winter. Life, death, rebirth. Over and over. forever. But the wound never healed. The trauma never faded. The anger never went away. She was still the girl who had been stolen. Still the child who had been forced to grow up too fast. Still the innocent who had been broken by the cruelty of others. In the upper world, she tried to be happy. But she was always thinking about the leaving. Always knowing that the goodbye was coming. Always feeling the weight of the crown she would have to wear again. In the underworld, she tried to be strong. But she was always thinking about the leaving. Always knowing that she would have to say goodbye to this world too. Always feeling the weight of the crown she never wanted to wear. She was the goddess of transitions, of change, of the movement between life and death. But she was also the goddess of being trapped, of being unable to escape, of being forced to be something you never wanted to be. The mortals made her story into a myth about the seasons, about why winter comes, about why the world dies and comes back to life. They made it beautiful. They made it natural. They made it seem like it was supposed to happen. But it was not supposed to happen. It was not natural. It was not beautiful. It was the result of one person's selfish desire destroying an innocent life. It was the result of being forced to make the best of a terrible situation. The story they tell is not about spring. It is about trauma. About how one moment of violence can destroy a life. About how some wounds never heal. About how some choices are not really choices at all. And most of all, it is about how the world can celebrate something that was built on suffering. How they can see beauty in what was really destruction. How they can make myths out of what was really just cruelty. Persephone is still the goddess of spring. Still the goddess of new life. Still the goddess of hope. But she is also the goddess of trauma. The goddess of being forced to become something you never wanted to be. The goddess of making the best of a terrible situation. She is the goddess of survivors. Of those who have been broken, but continue to live. Of those who have been forced to be strong when they wanted to be weak. Of those who have been forced to smile when they wanted to cry. And in a world that has forgotten how to recognize trauma, how to acknowledge suffering, how to understand that some wounds never heal, she is more alone than ever. But she continues, because survivors continue, because the broken continue, because even when you are forced to be something you never want to be, you can still choose to be kind, to be gentle, to be the person you would have been if the world had been different. And maybe that's the most tragic thing of all. Not that she was broken, but that she remained kind. Not that she was forced to be strong, but that she chose to be gentle. Not that she was stolen, but that she still chose to bloom. Persephone is the goddess of spring, and spring always comes back, even after the darkest winter, even after the cruelest frost, even after everything seems dead and gone. But spring remembers the winter, and the winter changes what spring can be. Dionysus, the revel's bitter end. Dionysus was the god of wine, of celebration, of losing yourself in joy. He was chaos and ecstasy, and the wild dance that made mortals forget their troubles. He was the god of letting go. But he was also the god of madness. And in the end, that's what destroyed him. People came to Dionysus when life became too much, when work crushed their spirits, when love broke their hearts, when the world felt too heavy to carry. They drank his wine and danced his dances and forgot, for a while, that they were mortal. His festivals were wild, dangerous, beautiful. Men and women would tear off their clothes and run through the forests, screaming with joy. They would drink until they couldn't stand. They would dance until they collapsed. They would lose themselves completely. And Dionysus loved it. He fed on their abandon. Their wildness, their need to escape reality made him stronger. He was the god of the moment when you stop thinking and start feeling. When you stop being careful and start being alive. But the world began to change. People found new ways to escape. Better ways. Safer ways. At first, it was just medicine. Pills that made you happy without the headache. Drinks that relaxed you without the madness. Science gave mortals what Dionysus had given them, but with control, with measurement, with safety. Then came the screens. The games. The endless scrolling that made hours disappear. Why dance in the forest when you could escape into a virtual world? Why lose yourself in wine when you could lose yourself in a story? Why risk madness when you could have distraction? The festivals grew smaller. The wine turned ordinary. The wild dances became choreographed performances. People still drank, but they didn't need a god to show them how. They had learned to escape without him. Dionysus watched his temples empty, not because people stopped wanting to escape, but because they found better ways to do it. Cleaner ways. Ways that didn't require sacrifice or prayer or risk. Without worshippers, Dionysus began to fade. But he didn't fade quietly. He raged. He screamed. He threw himself into his own madness, drinking wine that tasted like ash, dancing alone in empty temples. He tried to adapt. He haunted nightclubs and bars, hoping to find the old wildness. But even the wildest parties felt tame, controlled. People drank to have fun, not to touch the divine. They danced to music, not to lose their minds. The madness that had once been his gift became his curse. Without mortals to share it with, it turned inward. He became paranoid, angry, desperate. The god who had once brought joy now brought only chaos. And chaos without joy is just destruction. He visited the few who still remembered him. The ones who drank too much, the ones who partied too hard, the ones who were drowning in their own need to escape. But they didn't want a god. They wanted help. And Dionysus had never learned how to help anyone, only how to make them forget. The worst part was watching mortals celebrate without him. They still had festivals, still had wine, still had dancing. But they didn't need him for any of it. They had learned to create their own ecstasy, their own escape, their own madness. And their versions were better, safer. They could party without losing themselves completely. They could drink without destroying their lives. They could dance without going insane. Dionysus realized he had never been about joy. He had been about pain, about the need to escape pain. When mortals learned to escape without self-destruction, they didn't need him anymore. He was the god of the hangover, the god of the morning after, the god of waking up and not remembering what you did. And when people stopped wanting to forget, they stopped needing him. In his final days, Dionysus wandered the world alone. He visited rehab centers and therapy offices, watching mortals learn to face their pain instead of drowning it. He saw them find healthy ways to celebrate, to relax, to enjoy life. He wanted to be angry, to curse them for abandoning him. But he couldn't, because they were happier without him, healthier, more alive. The god of wine realized that he had never given mortals life. He had given them a way to avoid living. And when they learned to live without avoiding, they didn't need him anymore. Dionysus didn't die in battle. He didn't fade from neglect. He was replaced by something better, by healing, by health, by the idea that you don't need to lose yourself to find joy. His last act was to pour out his wine, not in anger, but in acceptance. The god of chaos learned, in the end, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. The party was over, and for the first time in his existence, Dionysus was glad. Ares, the war god's humiliation. Ares was the god of war, of blood and battle, and the terrible beauty of violence. He was strength without mercy, courage without thought, the primal scream that turns ordinary men into killers. But war changed. And when war changed, Ares became obsolete. In the ancient world, war was personal, man against man, sword against sword. You looked into your enemy's eyes as you killed him. You felt his blood on your hands. You heard his last breath. Ares loved this kind of war. He fed on the rage, the fear, the desperate courage of men who fought for their lives. He was there in every battle cry, every clash of metal, every moment when civilization fell away and left only the animal need to survive. He didn't care about justice. He didn't care about right and wrong. He cared about the fight itself, the moment when training and thought disappeared and left only instinct, the moment when you became pure will, pure violence, pure life. Warriors prayed to him not for victory, but for strength, for the courage to face death, for the madness that made killing possible. And he gave it to them, gladly. But mortals learned to kill from far away. First arrows, then cannons, then bullets, then bombs, then missiles that could cross oceans and kill thousands without a single warrior ever seeing his enemy's face. War became science, strategy, technology. The personal became impersonal. The individual became irrelevant. One man with a button could do what used to take armies. Ares tried to adapt. He haunted battlefields, looking for the old intensity. But even the soldiers seemed disconnected. They fought behind screens, watching their targets through cameras. They launched drones from thousands of miles away. They killed with precision, not passion. The rage was gone. The fear was gone. The wild, desperate courage was gone. War had become a job. And jobs don't need gods. What humiliated Ares most was not that war had become bloodless. It was that it had become cowardly. The same leaders who sent men to die hid in bunkers. The same countries that preached peace built weapons that could end worlds. War had become about avoiding war, about threatening destruction so terrible that no one would dare fight. The god of battle watched mortals spend fortunes on weapons they prayed they'd never use. He visited the few conflicts that still resembled real war. But even there, he found disappointment. Child soldiers who didn't choose to fight, civilians who died by accident, refugees who ran instead of fighting back. The honor was gone. The glory was gone. War had become suffering without purpose, death without meaning. And Ares, who had once been the god of heroic violence, became the god of senseless tragedy. The worst part was how mortals remembered him, not as the god of necessary violence, but as the god of stupid violence. In their stories, he was the fool, the brute, the one who solved problems with his fists while smarter gods used their minds. They made him a joke, a cartoon villain, a symbol of everything wrong with masculine aggression. They forgot that he had once been the god of survival, of the strength that protects what you love. Movies showed him as a mindless monster. Books made him the enemy of peace. Children were taught that war was always wrong, that violence was never the answer, that Ares was something to be ashamed of. He wanted to scream at them, "You made me. You needed me. When your families were threatened, when your cities were burning, when your people were dying, you called my name." But no one was listening. They had learned to fight their battles in boardrooms and courts. They had learned to conquer with money and ideas. They had learned to win without war. In his final years, Ares wandered the world like a ghost. He visited veterans' hospitals, watching broken soldiers struggle with memories of violence. He saw them ashamed of what they'd done, haunted by what they'd seen. He wanted to tell them that their violence had been sacred, that their courage had been divine, that what they'd done in war was not separate from who they were as people. It was the truest thing about them. But even the warriors didn't want to hear it. They wanted to forget. They wanted to heal. They wanted to be anything other than what they had been. Ares realized that he had never been the god of war. He had been the god of the moment when peaceful people became killers. And when the world decided that peaceful people should stay peaceful, there was no place for him. Hephaestus, the forge's lonely flame, Hephaestus was the god of fire and metal and making things that last. He was the smith who forged the weapons of heroes, the craftsman who built the palaces of gods, the inventor who turned raw materials into miracles. But he was also ugly, crippled, alone, and in the end, that's what destroyed him. While other gods played politics and waged wars, Hephaestus worked. His forge never cooled. His hammer never stopped. He created beauty from chaos, order from raw materials, purpose from metal and flame. He made Zeus's thunderbolts, Athena's shield, Achilles' armor, every weapon that mattered, every tool that changed the world, every piece of art that took mortals' breath away. It all came from his hands. Mortals worshipped him because they understood him. He was like them, flawed, hardworking, practical. He didn't demand grand sacrifices or perfect temples. He just wanted them to build things, to create, to make the world better with their hands. Blacksmiths prayed to him. Craftsmen left offerings at his altar. Anyone who worked with their hands felt his presence. He was the god of honest work, of calloused palms, of the satisfaction that comes from making something real. But then came the machines. At first, they were simple. Water wheels, windmills, tools that made work easier. Hephaestus welcomed them. They were still made by hand, still required skill, still honored the craft. Then came the factories, the assembly lines, the mass production. Suddenly, one machine could do the work of 100 craftsmen, and it could do it faster, cheaper, more perfectly. The forges grew cold. The workshops closed. The apprentices found other jobs. Why spend years learning to make a horseshoe when a machine could stamp out 1,000 in an hour? Hephaestus watched his worshippers disappear, not because they stopped needing things made, but because they stopped needing human hands to make them. The creation became separated from the creator. The product became more important than the process. Without worshippers, Hephaestus's forge began to die. The fire that had burned for millennia started to flicker. The tools that had shaped legends began to rust. The workshop that had been the heart of creation became a museum of abandoned dreams. He tried to adapt. He learned about the new machines, the new processes, the new ways of making things. But every innovation took him further from what he had been. The more efficient creation became, the less it needed him. 3D printers could make anything. Robots could build without rest. Computers could design without flaw. The perfect creations that had once required divine skill now happened at the push of a button. Hephaestus realized that mortals had learned to create without creators. They had machines that made machines, processes that improved themselves, systems that needed no god, no artist, no human touch. The cruelest part was that Hephaestus had always been the imperfect god. He was lame. He was ugly. He was mocked by the other gods. But mortals had loved him precisely because he was flawed. He understood what it meant to be broken and still create beauty. He knew what it meant to be rejected and still do the work. He was the god of everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, but kept trying anyway. But the new world didn't want imperfection. It wanted efficiency, precision, perfection. The flaws that had made him relatable became the reasons he was obsolete. Mass production didn't have bad days. Machines didn't get tired. Computers didn't make mistakes. The beautiful imperfections that came from human hands became defects to be eliminated. In his final years, Hephaestus tried to make one last thing, something that would remind the world why handmade mattered, why imperfection was beautiful, why the touch of a creator was worth preserving. He worked for decades on a single piece, a sculpture that captured everything he had learned about beauty and strength and the dignity of honest work. It was flawed like everything he made, but it was real. It was alive. It was him. When he finished, he looked for someone to give it to, but there was no one left who would understand, no one who would see the hours of work, the skill, the love that had gone into making it. The craftsmen were gone. The apprentices were gone. The people who understood that creation was sacred were gone. The world had learned to make things without making them matter. Hephaestus didn't rage against his fate. He didn't curse the machines or the progress or the people who had forgotten him. He was too tired for anger. He simply let his forge grow cold. For the first time in eternity, the fire went out. The hammer stopped. The god of creation stopped creating. But he didn't disappear. He remained in his workshop, surrounded by tools no one would ever use again. He became the keeper of forgotten skills, the guardian of lost arts, the last reminder of what it meant to make something with your hands. And sometimes, very rarely, someone would stumble into his workshop, a craftsman who still cared about quality, an artist who still believed in beauty, a maker who still understood that imperfection was human. And for them, just for them, Hephaestus would light the forge one more time. Hecate, the witches banished magic. Hecate was the goddess of magic, of crossroads, of the thin places where worlds touch. She was the keeper of secrets, the guardian of forbidden knowledge, the witch who walked between life and death. But magic died. And when magic died, Hecate became something worse than forgotten. She became feared. Hecate lived in the spaces others avoided, the crossroads at midnight, the threshold between rooms, the moment between sleeping and waking. She was the goddess of transitions, of change, of the dangerous knowledge that came from crossing boundaries. Mortals came to her when they needed the impossible, when love required a potion, when enemies needed cursing, when the future needed revealing. She didn't judge their requests. She didn't ask if they deserved what they wanted. She simply provided. Her magic was wild, unpredictable, dangerous. It came with a price, always a price, but it worked. In a world where gods rarely answered prayers, Hecate delivered results. Witches worshipped her. Healers prayed to her. Anyone who worked with herbs or charms or the secret names of things felt her presence. She was the goddess of people who lived at the edges, who dealt with the strange and the supernatural. But the world grew afraid of women who knew too much, who could heal without permission, who could curse without consequence, who could live without depending on men. They called them witches. They said they were evil. They said they served the devil. They said they were dangerous. And they were right about the last part. Women with knowledge were dangerous to systems that depended on women being powerless. Hecate watched her priestesses hunted, burned, drowned, tortured until they confessed to crimes they didn't commit. The wise women who had delivered babies and healed the sick became symbols of everything wrong with female power. The witch trials weren't just about superstition. They were about fear. Fear of women who knew things. Fear of women who could do things. Fear of women who didn't need permission to exist. And Hecate, who had once been honored as a goddess, became the patron saint of outcasts, the protector of the persecuted, the mother of everyone the world wanted to silence. Then came science, logic, reason. The world decided that magic was just science they didn't understand yet, that healing was chemistry, that prophecy was psychology, that power was physics. At first, Hecate was curious. Science was just another way of knowing, another path to understanding, another form of magic, really. But scientists didn't want to be called magicians. They wanted to be respectable, rational, the opposite of everything she represented. They explained away her mysteries. Herbs became medicine. Curses became coincidence. Prophecies became statistics. The supernatural became natural. The magical became mundane. And the people who had once needed her magic found other ways to get what they wanted. Pills instead of potions. Therapy instead of spells. Technology instead of transformation. Without believers, Hecate began to fade. But she didn't fade quietly. She raged. She cursed. She sent nightmares to the scientists who had stolen her power. She haunted the laboratories where they dissected her mysteries. But her curses fell on deaf ears. Her magic couldn't touch minds that didn't believe in it. Her power meant nothing to people who had decided she was imaginary. She retreated to the places that still remembered her. The crossroads, the graveyards, the spaces between day and night. But even these places were shrinking. Streetlights banished the darkness. GPS eliminated the need for crossroads. Cremation replaced burial. The thin places where worlds touched became thick with disbelief. The boundaries she had guarded became walls she couldn't cross. The goddess of transitions became trapped in a world that refused to change. In her final years, Hecate found refuge with the outcasts, the people who still believed in magic, even if the world called them crazy, the witches who practiced in secret, the pagans who honored the old ways, the seekers who knew that science couldn't explain everything. But even they changed her. They made her safe, sanitized. They turned her wild magic into self-help, her dangerous knowledge into positive thinking, her crossroads into life coaching. They meant well. They wanted to honor her. But they also wanted to be respectable, to fit in, to practice magic without being called witches. Hecate watched her power become therapy, her spells become affirmations, her curses become boundary setting. The goddess of dangerous knowledge became the patron saint of personal growth. Hecate didn't die. She couldn't. She was the goddess of things that exist in the spaces between existence and non-existence. She was too liminal to live, too persistent to die. She simply became a ghost of herself, a memory of magic, a reminder that there had once been mysteries worth fearing, knowledge worth dying for, power worth burning women alive to stop. And sometimes, at crossroads where the streetlights don't reach, she still waits for someone who needs real magic, real power, real change, someone willing to pay the real price, the old price, the dangerous price. But no one comes. And Hecate remains alone in the spaces between worlds, guarding secrets no one wants to know. Rhea, the mother's lost legacy. Rhea was the mother of gods, the Titan who gave birth to Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. She was the ultimate mother, fierce, protective, willing to sacrifice everything for her children. But her story was never told. And when the world forgot mothers, it forgot her too. Rhea's story should have been legendary. She was the one who saved the gods. When her husband Cronus devoured their children, she was the one who hid Zeus. She was the one who fed Cronus a stone wrapped in blankets. She was the one who planned the rebellion that freed her children from their father's stomach. Without Rhea, there would have been no Zeus, no Olympus, no gods at all. She was the mother who made everything possible, the woman who chose her children over her husband, the Titan who changed the world. But her story was always told as Zeus's story. He was the hero who defeated Cronus. He was the savior who freed his siblings. He was the one who got the glory, the temples, the worship. Rhea was mentioned in passing, a footnote, a supporting character in someone else's tale. The mother who existed only to give birth to more important people. No one remembered what Rhea had given up. She had been a Titan, a primal force, a goddess of earth and fertility. She had power of her own, a nature of her own, a purpose beyond motherhood. But she had chosen to be a mother, and in that choice, she had become invisible. Her identity merged with her children's needs. Her power became their power. Her story became their story. She had saved the world, but the world only remembered her children. She had been wise, but they only saw her as nurturing. She had been strong, but they only needed her to be gentle. The woman who had outwitted the king of Titans became just another mother, just another caregiver, just another person whose accomplishments were forgotten the moment her children grew up. As the world changed, motherhood changed too, but not in ways that honored Rhea. Instead, it became smaller, more demanding, less respected. Mothers were expected to be perfect, to sacrifice everything without complaint, to find fulfillment in their children's achievements while having none of their own, to be strong enough to handle everything, but never strong enough to be seen as threatening. Rhea watched mothers lose their identities, their dreams, their recognition. They were expected to be everything to everyone while being nothing to themselves. The world celebrated Mother's Day with flowers and cards, but paid mothers less than childless women. It praised maternal sacrifice, but offered no support for maternal ambition. It honored motherhood in theory while punishing mothers in practice. Worst of all, Rhea watched mothers blame themselves for everything, for their children's failures, for their own dreams, for not being enough, not doing enough, not sacrificing enough. She saw mothers apologize for working, for not working, for having ambitions, for not having ambitions, for being too much, for not being enough. The world had convinced mothers that they were always wrong, that their children's problems were their fault, that their own needs were selfish, that their love was either smothering or insufficient. Rhea had never felt guilty about saving her children. She had never questioned whether she was a good mother. She had simply done what needed to be done. But the mothers who came after her lived in constant fear of judgment. As Rhea aged, she became more and more invisible, not because she was dying, but because the world had decided that older mothers didn't matter, that once their children were grown, they had no purpose. She watched mothers become grandmothers and disappear, their wisdom ignored, their experience dismissed, their stories untold. They were expected to serve without recognition, to love without reciprocation, to exist without acknowledgement. The mother who had saved the gods became just another invisible woman, just another person whose contributions were forgotten the moment they were no longer needed. Rhea had given everything to her children, her power, her recognition, her story, and they had taken it all without question, without gratitude, without even noticing. Zeus became king of the gods and forgot who had made it possible. Poseidon ruled the sea and never credited the mother who had saved him. Hades controlled the underworld and never acknowledged the woman who had given him life. They had become their own people, with their own stories, their own glory, and that was what she had wanted. But she had never imagined that their independence would mean her erasure. Rhea didn't die. She simply became what all mothers become: a background presence, a taken-for-granted force, a person whose love is assumed and whose sacrifices are invisible. She remains in the spaces between stories, the unnamed force that makes everything possible, the forgotten woman whose choices shaped the world. And sometimes, when a mother saves her child, when a woman makes an impossible choice, when someone sacrifices everything for love, Rhea is there, unseen, unrecognized, but present, the mother of gods, the forgotten savior, the woman whose story was never told, but whose love made every other story possible. Tantalus, the torment of eternal want. Tantalus was not a god. He was a mortal king who thought he could trick the gods. He was punished for his arrogance with eternal hunger and thirst, forever reaching for food and water that would always slip away. But his punishment became something worse than torment. It became normal. Tantalus had committed the ultimate betrayal. He had killed his own son, Pelops, and served him as dinner to the gods. He wanted to test them, to see if they were truly all-knowing, to prove that even divinity could be fooled. The gods saw through his trick immediately. They were disgusted, horrified. They brought Pelops back to life and condemned Tantalus to eternal punishment in the underworld. He was placed in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink. Above him hung fruit that moved away whenever he reached for it. He would spend eternity wanting what he could never have. It was meant to be the worst fate imaginable, a punishment so terrible that mortals would never dare repeat his crime. But instead, it became a prophecy. Tantalus didn't suffer alone. His punishment infected his entire bloodline. His descendants were cursed to destroy each other, generation after generation. Murder, betrayal, cannibalism in the house of Tantalus became synonymous with horror. But the curse didn't stop with his family. It spread to humanity itself. The need for what you cannot have. The hunger that is never satisfied. The thirst that is never quenched. Mortals began to live like Tantalus, always reaching, always wanting, always finding that satisfaction slipped away the moment they grasped it. They called it ambition. They called it progress. They called it human nature. But it was really just his curse, spreading through the world like a disease. In the modern world, everyone became Tantalus. The technology that was meant to satisfy desires only created new ones. The wealth that was supposed to bring happiness only revealed how much more wealth was needed. People scrolled through endless feeds, always reaching for the next post, the next like, the next moment of satisfaction that would dissolve the instant they found it. They shopped for things they didn't need with money. They didn't have to impress people they didn't like. The water and fruit that tormented Tantalus became advertisements, social media, dating apps, news cycles, shopping websites, all designed to make people want what they couldn't have, to promise satisfaction that would never come. Tantalus watched from the underworld as his punishment became the human condition. He was no longer unique, no longer special. Everyone was suffering his fate, but they called it normal. He tried to warn them, to tell them that the wanting was a trap, that the reaching was pointless, that the hunger would never end. But no one could hear him. They were too busy reaching for their own unreachable fruit. The god of eternal want became the god of consumer culture, the patron saint of dissatisfaction, the deity of, if only I had more. What made Tantalus's suffering worse was that he remembered satisfaction. He remembered being full, being content, being enough. The torment wasn't just the wanting, it was the memory of not wanting. But the mortals who lived his curse had no such memories. They had never known satisfaction. They had been raised on wanting, taught that happiness was always one purchase away, one achievement away, one relationship away. They didn't know they were being punished. They thought they were living. In his final realization, Tantalus understood the true horror of his punishment. It wasn't that he couldn't eat or drink. It was that he couldn't stop trying to eat and drink. The reaching was the torture. The hope was the pain. The belief that this time would be different was the cruelest part of all. He could have chosen to stop reaching, to accept his fate, to find peace in wanting nothing, but the curse wouldn't let him. It made him believe that satisfaction was possible, that relief was coming, that the next reach would be the one that worked. And humanity had inherited that same delusion. They could have chosen contentment, gratitude, enough, but the curse made them believe that happiness was always one more thing away. Tantalus is still there, in the underworld, reaching for fruit that will never come. But he's no longer alone. He's surrounded by billions of mortals living the same punishment, calling it life. The king who tried to trick the gods became the god of being tricked. The man who wanted to prove his cleverness became the symbol of human foolishness. And the worst part is that the punishment worked. Humanity learned the lesson Tantalus was meant to teach. They learned that wanting what you cannot have is torture. They just couldn't stop doing it. The curse of Tantalus isn't eternal punishment. It's eternal choice. The choice to keep reaching, keep wanting, keep believing that satisfaction is possible. And every day, humanity chooses to keep reaching. Cronus. The Titans' chained fall. Cronus was the king of Titans, the ruler of the Golden Age, the god of time itself. He was power incarnate until he became so afraid of losing that power that he destroyed everything he was meant to protect. His fall wasn't just the end of a king. It was the end of an era, the end of the idea that power could be held forever. Cronus had overthrown his own father, Uranus, to become king. He knew what it meant to rebel against a parent, to destroy the old order, to take what belonged to someone else. So when prophecy told him that one of his children would do the same to him, he believed it. He had done it before. Why wouldn't it happen again? His solution was monstrous. He would eat his children, all of them. The moment they were born, he would swallow them whole. No children meant no rebellion. No future meant no threat. Cronus didn't see it as evil. He saw it as necessary, as practical, as the only way to keep the world stable, the only way to prevent chaos. One by one, Cronus consumed his children. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. He felt their power join his as he swallowed them. Their potential became his strength. He told himself he was protecting the world, that his rule was good, that his children would understand someday that their sacrifice had been necessary. But with each child he devoured, he became less human, less divine, less like the king he had wanted to be. He became hunger itself, fear itself, the terror of losing everything wrapped in the shape of a god. His wife, Rhea, watched in horror, but she was powerless to stop him. He was too strong, too determined, too convinced that he was right. When Zeus was born, Rhea finally found the courage to act. She hid the baby and gave Cronus a stone wrapped in blankets. In his fear and hunger, he swallowed it without looking. For the first time in his reign, Cronus had been fooled, not by an enemy, but by his own wife. Not by force, but by love. The king who trusted no one had been betrayed by the only person he should have trusted. Zeus grew up in hiding, learning about his father's crimes, about the siblings trapped in Cronus's stomach, about the fear that had turned the king into a monster. And when Zeus was old enough, he did exactly what Cronus had always known he would do. He rebelled. The war between the Titans and the Olympians was brutal. Father against son, the old order against the new, the past against the future. Cronus fought with the strength of his devoured children, but Zeus fought with their love, with their desire for freedom, with their need to exist. In the end, Cronus lost, not because he was weak, but because he had made himself weak. His fear had consumed him, just as surely as he had consumed his children. Zeus forced him to vomit up his siblings. They emerged fully grown, ready to fight, ready to rule, ready to be everything Cronus had tried to prevent them from becoming. Cronus was cast into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. He was chained with bonds that could never be broken. A king of time was trapped outside of time. The ruler of everything was given nothing to rule. But his punishment was worse than imprisonment. It was irrelevance. The world moved on without him. His children built a new order. His grandchildren forgot his name. He had been so afraid of being replaced that he had made his replacement inevitable. So afraid of losing power that he had lost everything else. So afraid of the future that he had destroyed his own. In Tartarus, Cronus had nothing but time. The irony was perfect. The god of time had all the time in the world and nothing to do with it. He could think, remember, regret. He remembered the golden age when mortals lived in peace, when the world was young and full of possibility, when he had been a good king, a just ruler, a god worth worshipping. He remembered the moment when fear had first entered his heart, when he had started to see enemies everywhere, when he had started to believe that power was more important than love. But remembering changed nothing. The chains held. The pit remained. The world above continued without him. What hurt most was how quickly he was forgotten. His children spoke of him, but only as a cautionary tale. His grandchildren knew him only as the monster who had eaten his own family. No one remembered the golden age. No one spoke of the peace he had brought. No one honored the god he had been before fear had made him into something else. He had become a symbol, a warning, a reminder of what happens when power corrupts. But he had also been a person, a king, a father who had loved his children so much that he had destroyed them to keep them safe. From his prison, Cronus watched his children make the same mistakes he had made. Zeus became paranoid. Hera became jealous. The Olympians fought each other for power, just as the Titans had. They had learned nothing from his fall. They thought they were different, better, wiser, but they were just younger versions of the same story. The cycle continued. Power corrupted. Fear consumed. Love was sacrificed for control. And eventually, the Olympians would fall just as he had fallen. Cronus is still in Tartarus, still chained, still forgotten. But he is also still the god of time. And time, in the end, wins every battle. He knows that everything his children built will eventually crumble, that their power will fade, that their names will be forgotten just as his was forgotten. He is patient. He is eternal. He is the reminder that all power is temporary, all kings fall, and all children eventually replace their parents. The Titan who tried to stop time learned that time cannot be stopped, only delayed, only feared, only wasted. And in the end, time always wins. Atlas, the sky's endless burden Atlas, was the Titan who held up the sky. For eternity, he stood at the edge of the world, his shoulders bearing the weight of the heavens. He was strength incarnate, endurance personified, the foundation upon which everything else rested. But no one remembered that he was also a person, a being with thoughts and feelings and dreams, a prisoner who had been forgotten by the world he supported. Atlas had fought against Zeus in the war between Titans and Olympians. He had been a general, a leader, a force to be reckoned with. He had believed in the old order, in the way things had always been. When the Titans lost, most were imprisoned in Tartarus. But Atlas received a different punishment. He was condemned to hold up the sky for all eternity, to be the pillar that kept the heavens from crushing the earth. It was meant to be a punishment, a burden, a reminder of his rebellion. But it was also a necessity. Someone had to hold up the sky, and Atlas was strong enough to do it. So he became less than a prisoner. He became a tool, a living foundation, a person reduced to a function. At first, Atlas raged against his fate. He strained against the weight, trying to shrug off the sky. But the burden was too great, the consequences too terrible. If he let go, the world would end. So he held on, not out of loyalty to Zeus, but out of responsibility to everyone else, to the mortals who lived below, to the gods who ruled above, to the world that had forgotten him, but still needed him. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The weight never lessened. The burden never shifted. Atlas stood at the edge of the world, holding up the sky, while life continued around him. Heroes occasionally visited him. They wanted his help or his wisdom, or just to see the famous Titan who held up the heavens. But they never stayed long. They had their own quests, their own stories, their own lives to live. What made Atlas's suffering unique was that his burden was invisible. People could see him holding something, but they couldn't see the weight. They couldn't understand the strain. They couldn't imagine the constant crushing pressure. To them, he looked strong, capable, unbreakable. They assumed he was fine, that holding up the sky was easy for him, that he didn't need help or comfort or even acknowledgement. They took his strength for granted. They assumed he would always be there, always holding up their world, always bearing the weight they couldn't carry themselves. And he was, because he had no choice, because someone had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Atlas began to understand that his punishment wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He was trapped not just by the weight of the sky, but by the weight of responsibility. He couldn't rest. He couldn't relax. He couldn't have a bad day or a weak moment or a single second of doubt. The entire world depended on his strength, his endurance, his unwavering commitment. He watched mortals struggle with their own burdens, jobs, families, responsibilities. But their burdens were temporary. They could quit. They could ask for help. They could fail without ending the world. Atlas had none of those options. He was the foundation, the support, the one who held everything together. And foundations aren't allowed to crack. The worst part of Atlas's punishment was the loneliness. He stood at the edge of the world, isolated from everyone and everything. He could see life happening, but he couldn't participate in it. He watched civilizations rise and fall. He saw heroes born and legends die. He observed the changing world from his unchanging position, forever present, but never part of the story. People spoke of him, but they didn't speak to him. They used his name. He has the weight of the world on his shoulders, but they forgot he was a person. He became a metaphor, a symbol, a representation of strength, rather than a being who felt weak. As the world modernized, Atlas became even more invisible. People stopped believing in titans, but they still needed someone to hold up their world. They just didn't call it the sky anymore. They called it infrastructure, systems, the foundations of society, the invisible support that kept everything running. Atlas watched as new Atlas figures emerged, the workers who maintained the power grid, the programmers who kept the internet running, the essential workers who held society together. They were invisible too, taken for granted, expected to be strong. And just like him, they weren't allowed to fail, because failure meant collapse, and collapse meant the end of everything. Atlas realized that his punishment had become the human condition. Everyone was holding up some version of the sky. Everyone was carrying weight that others couldn't see. Everyone was expected to be strong without being acknowledged. Parents held up their families. Workers held up the economy. Caregivers held up the sick and dying. And all of them were invisible. All of them were taken for granted. All of them were Atlas. In his final understanding, Atlas stopped seeing his burden as a punishment. He started seeing it as a purpose. He wasn't being tortured, he was serving. He wasn't being punished, he was protecting. The weight didn't get lighter. The loneliness didn't end. The invisibility didn't change, but the meaning did. He wasn't holding up the sky because he had to. He was holding it up because he chose to, because someone had to, because the world needed foundations, because strength without recognition was still strength. Atlas is still there, at the edge of the world, holding up the sky. He will always be there, not because he's trapped, but because he's necessary. He is the God of everyone who carries invisible weight, who supports without recognition, who holds things together while others live their lives. The Titan who was punished with responsibility became the patron saint of the responsible, the prisoner who became a foundation, the person who was forgotten but never gave up. And the sky stays up. The world continues. The burden is carried, because Atlas chooses to carry it. Eos, the dawn's cursed love. Eos was the goddess of dawn. Every morning, she painted the sky with rose and gold, bringing light to a world that had forgotten darkness. She was beauty incarnate, hope personified, the promise that every day could begin again. But Eos had a curse. She fell in love with mortals. Not once, not twice. Again and again, she lost her heart to men who would age and die while she remained forever young. It was her tragedy, her weakness, her endless source of pain. And it was how she learned that love without time is just another form of death. It always started the same way. Eos would see a mortal man, strong, beautiful, full of life, and feel her immortal heart stir. She would visit him in the early morning hours, when the world was quiet and the light was soft. She would love him completely, desperately, as only a goddess could. But mortals age. They grow old. They die. And gods, Gods stay the same. Her first love was Tithonus. She begged Zeus to make him immortal, and he granted her wish. But she forgot to ask for eternal youth. She watched the man she loved grow old and frail and twisted while she remained beautiful and strong. Eventually, he became so ancient that he could only chirp like a cricket, and she had to lock him away to stop his suffering. That's when she learned that forever is too long for love. After Tithonus, Eos tried to love more carefully. She chose younger men, stronger men, men who seemed like they could last longer. But time is not negotiable. It takes everyone eventually. She loved Orion, the great hunter. She watched him grow from a boy into a legend, and watched him die in the hunt. She loved Cephalus, who chose duty over her love and died for it. She loved Ganymede, who was taken by Zeus before she could lose him to time. Each love was perfect. Each love was doomed. Each love taught her that immortality is a prison when everyone you care about is sentenced to death. But Eos couldn't stop. Every dawn she had to rise. Every morning she had to bring light to the world. And every day she saw mortals living their brief, bright lives and felt her heart break a little more. She began to hate her job. The sunrise became a reminder of all the mornings she had shared with men who were now dust. The beautiful colors she painted across the sky felt like morning clothes. The light she brought to the world only showed her more clearly what she had lost. People praised the dawn. They called it beautiful, inspiring, hopeful. They didn't know that every sunrise was painted with tears. What made Eos's suffering unique was that she remembered everything. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment of happiness. Mortals could forget. They could move on. They could let time heal their wounds. But gods remember forever. Every detail stays sharp. Every emotion remains fresh. For Eos, the pain of losing her first love was just as real as the pain of losing her latest one. She carried all of them with her. Their voices, their faces, their final words. She was a museum of dead love, a goddess trapped in an endless cycle of attachment and loss. As the world modernized, Eos's curse became worse. People stopped noticing the dawn. They woke up to alarms instead of sunrise. They lived in cities where artificial light made the morning sky pale and forgettable. She still painted the sky every morning. She still brought light to the world, but fewer people saw it. Fewer people cared. The sunrise became background noise in a world that moved too fast to notice beauty. And without appreciation, even her work felt empty. Eos realized that her curse wasn't just about loving mortals. It was about loving anything in a world where nothing lasts. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that love without the possibility of loss is meaningless. But love with the certainty of loss is torture. She could choose not to love. She could protect herself from pain. But then she would become like the other gods, cold, distant, untouchable. She would survive, but she wouldn't live. Or she could keep loving, knowing that every attachment would end in sorrow. She could choose to feel everything, knowing that feelings are temporary and pain is permanent. In the end, Eos made her choice. She kept rising every morning. She kept painting the sky. She kept bringing light to a world that barely noticed her. And sometimes, when she saw a mortal who caught her eye, she let herself feel that familiar flutter of hope. She knew it would end in pain. She knew she would lose him. She knew she would carry his memory forever. But she also knew that a heart that stops loving is a heart that stops living. So she chose love. She chose pain. She chose to keep feeling in a world that had forgotten how to see beauty. The dawn still comes every morning. Rose and gold still paint the sky. Light still conquers darkness, even if no one stops to watch. And Eos is still there, loving hopelessly, losing inevitably, rising again. Because dawn always comes, even when it breaks your heart. It didn't happen overnight. The death of gods is a slow thing, like watching a fire burn down to embers. First bright, then dim, then just warmth, then nothing. The last prayer wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. It was probably just someone asking for help with a test, or for their sick grandmother to get better, or for rain for their crops. Small words that used to reach the heavens, but the heavens had grown quiet. It started with questions. Mortals had always asked them, why do bad things happen to good people? Why don't the gods answer? Why is there suffering if the gods are good? But for the first time, they started finding different answers. Not in temples or prayers, but in books and laboratories and their own minds. They discovered that sickness had causes they could understand, that weather followed patterns they could predict, that the world operated on rules they could learn. The gods had always been the answer to why, but now mortals were finding better answers. Then came the philosophers. They asked dangerous questions. What if the gods aren't real? What if they're just stories we tell ourselves? What if we made them up to explain things we didn't understand? These questions spread like wildfire, not because they were true, but because they were useful. A world with rules was easier to navigate than a world with moods. A universe that followed laws was safer than one that followed whims. The gods watched from Olympus as mortals chose predictability over mystery. They chose science over faith. They chose answers over wonder. The strangest part was how gentle it was. No one declared war on the gods. No one burned the temples in anger. They just stopped going. Church bells still rang, but to fewer ears. Prayers were still said, but with less conviction. The rituals continued, but they felt like habits rather than communication. It was like watching a conversation die. One person stops responding, then the other stops calling, and eventually the silence becomes normal. But mortals didn't stop believing. They just changed what they believed in. Instead of Zeus, they worshipped progress. Instead of Athena, they trusted science. Instead of Apollo, they followed reason. The old gods were replaced by new ones: democracy, technology, medicine, education. These new gods were more reliable. They delivered results. They improved lives. They answered prayers with actions instead of symbols. The Greek gods had ruled through fear and wonder. The new gods ruled through hope and proof. And in the end, hope won. The final blow came from the children. Each generation believed a little less than the one before. Parents told stories of the gods, but as entertainment, not truth. Children learned about Zeus and Hera in school, but the same way they learned about dinosaurs, as things that used to exist but didn't anymore. The gods became mythology, then history, then just stories, then just entertainment. Each step further from truth, closer to extinction. There were holdouts, there always are. Old women who still left offerings, scholars who studied the ancient ways, artists who found inspiration in the old stories. But they were few, and they were quiet, and they were dying. The gods felt each believer's death like a candle going out. One by one, the lights dimmed. The voices grew softer. The connection weakened. Until finally, there was just ... silence. No one remembers the last prayer. No one marked the moment when the gods officially stopped being real. It wasn't an event. It was a process. Like watching a star die. You can see it happening, but you can't point to the exact second it stops shining. The gods didn't announce their departure. They didn't say goodbye. They just ... faded. Like voices in the wind. Like footprints in sand. Like memories of a dream you can't quite remember. But death isn't always final. The gods died, but their stories lived. Their names survived. Their lessons echoed. People still said, Achilles' heel and Pandora's box. They still named their children after gods. They still used their stories to explain human nature. The gods were gone, but their shadows remained, cast in language, in art, in the deep places of the human heart where wonder lives. And the world moved on. It built skyscrapers instead of temples. It worshipped at the altar of progress. It found new ways to hope, new reasons to believe, new gods to serve. The old gods were forgotten, but the need for gods remained, because humans will always need something bigger than themselves to believe in, something to explain the unexplainable, something to comfort them in the dark. The names change, the faces change, the stories change, but the need never dies. That's the secret the Greek gods learned too late. They were never really about being real. They were about being needed. And when the need disappeared, so did they. Were they ever real? This is the question that haunts every story. Did the gods exist, or were they just dreams given names? The Greeks believed in them, built temples for them, sacrificed to them, shaped their lives around them. For thousands of years, Zeus was as real as the sunrise. Athena was as present as wisdom. Apollo was as certain as music. But belief doesn't make something true, and truth doesn't require belief. So, what were they? Maybe the gods were real, because people made them real. Not with flesh and blood, but with faith and fear and hope. When millions of people believe in something, when they pray to it and build temples for it and tell stories about it, does it become real? The Greeks didn't just believe in Zeus. They felt him in the thunder. They saw him in the lightning. They experienced his presence in every storm. If a God lives in the hearts and minds of believers, is that God any less real than a God who lives on a mountain? Or maybe the gods were never meant to be real in the way we understand reality. Maybe they were living metaphors, symbols with consciousness, ideas that could think and feel and act. Zeus wasn't just a man with a lightning bolt. He was power itself, authority, the force that keeps order in chaos. Athena wasn't just a warrior goddess. She was wisdom, strategy, the spark that turns knowledge into action. If the gods were metaphors, then they were the most powerful metaphors ever created. They weren't just about human nature. They were human nature given form and voice and story. Some say the gods were visitors from another world, beings so advanced that they seemed magical to primitive humans. Their technology looked like divine power. Their knowledge seemed like omniscience. Their longevity made them appear immortal. When these visitors left, they became legends. Their real history was transformed into mythology. Their science became magic. Their departure became disappearance. But if they were aliens, why did they care so much about human affairs? Why were they so petty, so jealous, so human in their flaws? Perhaps the gods were reflections of human rulers, kings and queens so powerful that they seemed divine, leaders so legendary that their stories grew beyond history into myth. Zeus could have been a great king whose rule was so absolute that people forgot he was mortal. Athena might have been a brilliant strategist whose wisdom seemed supernatural. Apollo could have been a poet king whose words were so beautiful they seemed inspired by divine breath. Over time, the human rulers became divine legends. Their palaces became Olympus. Their court became the pantheon. Their power became godhood. Modern thinkers say the gods were projections of the human mind. Zeus was the father figure, powerful, protective, but also demanding and sometimes cruel. Hera was the mother, nurturing but jealous, loving but possessive. Each god represented a part of human psychology. Eris was our capacity for violence. Aphrodite was our need for love. Dionysus was our desire for escape. They weren't real beings. They were real aspects of ourselves, given names and stories. In this view, the gods never died. They just went back where they came from, inside us. What if reality is more flexible than we think? What if consciousness and belief can actually shape the world? What if the gods existed in a space between real and unreal, between fact and fiction, between is and isn't? Quantum physics suggests that observation changes reality. Maybe collective belief does the same thing. Maybe the gods existed because people believed they existed and stopped existing when people stopped believing. They were real when they were needed, unreal when they weren't. Both true and false, depending on who was asking. The truth is, we'll never know. The gods left no physical evidence, no bones to carbon date, no DNA to analyze, no archaeological proof of their existence. But they left something else, stories. And stories have a reality of their own. They shape how we think, how we feel, how we understand ourselves and our world. Maybe that's enough. Maybe reality isn't about whether something physically exists. Maybe it's about whether something matters. The gods are gone, but their influence remains. We still tell their stories. We still use their names. We still see ourselves in their struggles. Every time someone says, "He's got the Midas touch," or "That's her Achilles heel," the gods live again. Every time a writer creates a character based on a Greek archetype, the gods return. Every time someone sees their own life reflected in an ancient myth, the gods are reborn. They exist in the space between memory and imagination, between past and present, between what was and what could be. Were the gods real? Yes and no. Both. Neither. They were real in the ways that mattered. They were unreal in the ways that didn't. They were as real as love, as true as hope, as lasting as memory. And maybe that's the most honest answer of all. The gods were as real as we needed them to be. No more, no less, just enough. The silence of Olympus the mountain is still there. You can visit it if you want. It's in Greece, between the earth and sky, just like the stories said. Tourists climb it every day. They take pictures. They buy souvenirs. They leave thinking they've seen something ancient and magical. But they haven't. They've seen a mountain. Just a mountain. The real Olympus, the one where gods lived and loved and ruled, is gone. Not destroyed. Not hidden. Simply ... absent. If you could see what was once there, you would find halls of gold turned to dust, thrones of marble cracked and forgotten, eternal flames that burned out centuries ago, leaving only cold stone and memories. The great table where the gods once feasted is empty. The cups that held nectar are dry. The plates that held ambrosia are clean. Everything is perfectly preserved and perfectly lifeless. It's like walking through a museum of a life that never was. But the strangest thing about Olympus now is not its emptiness. It's its expectation. The place still feels like it's waiting for something, like it knows its residents will return someday. The doors remain unlocked. The beds are made. The instruments are tuned. Everything is ready for gods who will never come home. It's the saddest kind of hope, the hope that doesn't know it's hopeless. Sometimes visitors to the mountain report strange things. Whispers in the wind, shadows that move wrong, the feeling of being watched by eyes that aren't there. Skeptics say it's imagination. Believers say it's the gods. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the echo of all the prayers that were never answered, all the hopes that were never fulfilled, all the faith that was never rewarded. The mountain remembers what used to be, and memory, even false memory, has its own kind of power. People still come to Olympus, not to pray, but to see. They want to touch history, to feel connected to something ancient and powerful, to believe for just a moment that magic once existed. They don't find gods, but they find something else. The realization that humans have always needed something bigger than themselves to believe in. The understanding that the gods were never really about being real. They were about being needed. And that need hasn't gone away. It's just found new names, new faces, new stories. The silence of Olympus teaches us something important. Nothing lasts forever. Not power, not belief, not even gods. Everything fades. Everything ends. Everything is forgotten. But it also teaches us something else. That ending isn't the same as meaninglessness. The gods mattered while they mattered. They were real while they were real. They lived while they lived. And their silence doesn't erase their story. It completes it. Some say the gods will come back when the world needs them again. When science fails and reason falls short. When humans remember that some questions don't have answers, only mysteries. They say Zeus will return with thunder that makes the earth tremble. That Athena will rise with wisdom the world has forgotten. That Apollo will sing songs that make the sun shine brighter. But they're wrong. The gods won't return. They can't. Too much has changed. Too much has been lost. The world that created them is gone. Instead, new gods will rise. They always do. They'll have different names and different stories, but they'll serve the same purpose. To explain the unexplainable. To comfort the afraid. To give meaning to the meaningless. They might be gods of technology or gods of nature. Gods of space or gods of the human heart. Gods of quantum mechanics or gods of artificial intelligence. The names will change. The faces will change, but the need will remain. And someday, these new gods will fade too. Their temples will empty. Their names will be forgotten. Their stories will become myths, then legends, then curiosities. Other gods will take their place. The cycle will continue, forever. Because the one thing that never dies is the human need for something divine. Something perfect. Something more than ourselves. The gods are dead. Long live the gods. This is how the Greek gods ended. Not with war, but with whispers. Not with fire, but with forgetting. Not with destruction, but with indifference. They faded like stars at dawn, like voices in the wind, like footprints in sand. But their ending was also a beginning. The beginning of new stories, new beliefs, new ways of understanding the world and our place in it. The gods are gone, but the God-shaped hole they left behind remains. And into that hole, new dreams will flow. New hopes will grow. New divinities will rise. The silence of Olympus is not the end of the story. It's the pause between chapters. The breath between words. The space where new gods learn to dream. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, you can hear the sound of the future being born. The gods are dead, but the need for gods is eternal. And from that need, new gods will rise. They always do. They always will. The silence of Olympus is not empty. It's full of possibility, full of hope, full of the next story waiting to be told. And that story begins now, with you, with your dreams, with your need for something more. The gods are dead. Long live the gods.